From London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. China's President Xi Jinping speaks to Donald Trump, with both agreeing to improve communication and contact.
Our other headlines: China's economy grows in the fourth quarter, bringing 2024 GDP to its 5% target.
Time's up for TikTok. The United States Supreme Court says the Chinese video platform must be sold or banned by Sunday.
And Israel's government meets to approve the ceasefire deal with Hamas after the Security Cabinet backs the plan.
President Xi Jinping says both he and Donald Trump want to improve their relationship and want a new start between China and the United States. Speaking to the incoming US president on the phone, Xi said the two countries should respect each other's core interests and concerns despite differences.
Trump is said to have expressed willingness to maintain open communication. Their call took place days ahead of Mr. Trump's inauguration on Monday, which will be attended by China's Vice President Han Zheng.
There's been a boost for China's economy after it grew more than expected towards the end of last year.
GDP was up 5.4% in the fourth quarter compared to 2023. This followed a series of stimulus measures by policymakers.
The figures helped lift full-year GDP growth to 5%, back in line with official government targets.
December's industrial output also exceeded expectations, expanding 6.2% year-on-year and bringing overall growth for 2024 to 5.8%.
And retail sales were also better than forecast, 3.7% up on the previous December. Sales in 2024 were 3.5% higher than 2023, totaling $6.8 trillion. Our correspondent B. Ran reports.
According to preliminary estimates, the gross domestic product of China was 134 trillion yuan in 2024, approximately $18 trillion, which is an increase of 5% over the previous year, meeting the annual growth target.
In 2024, by industries, the value of the primary industry was up 3.5% compared to 2023. The secondary industry increased by 5.3%, and the tertiary industry was up by 5%.
Data shows that grain output reached a new level, and production of animal husbandry grew steadily, while industrial production, equipment manufacturing, and service sector all grew in the previous year.
In the first quarter, the economy had a good start, but in the second and third quarter, the government saw challenges and took a series of measures to spur production, consumption, and market growth. The economy grew 5.4% in the fourth quarter from a year earlier, the largest expansion since the second quarter of 2023.
Data also shows that in 2024, the Consumer Price Index went up by 0.2% compared to the previous year. Producer prices and purchasing prices for industrial products both went down by 2.2% year-on-year. High-quality development was advanced in 2024. However, challenges remain due to adverse effects by the external environment, insufficient domestic demand, and enterprises' difficulties in production. China will accelerate its efforts to form a new pattern of development to achieve high-quality development in 2025. Deepen reform and opening up, and implement more proactive and effective macro policies to expand domestic demands and stabilize market expectations to achieve China's economic recovery and development. Biran, CGTN, Beijing.
Mark Oswald is chief economist and global strategist at the independent brokerage firm ADM ISI. Mark, good to see you. Welcome back. Let's just start with this phone call between China's President Xi and US incoming President Donald Trump. The two apparently in this phone call talked about many things, but they talked about trade. Given the possibility of US trade tariffs on Chinese goods imminently, what are you looking out for?
Well, I think first important thing is actually everyone is much more willing and ready to engage with the new administration in Washington. And that is actually a positive relative to the start of 2017. I think the most important thing is the communications channels are open. But they were open, for the last during the last Trump administration, and there was still a lot of trade tariffs. But I think everyone's actually now realizing that, just having wholesale tariff imposition is actually not going to be good for either China or for the USA. So I think there's a lot more room for discussion and negotiation than perhaps people give credit for.
We'll have to wait and see over coming days and weeks, obviously. Let's just drill down on the China story today. China's economy growing by 5% in 2024, hitting its target, and yet many people in China seemingly complaining about flatlining living standards. What does that disconnect say about the Chinese economy?
Well, it basically says it's still very reliant on investment and industrial production. Industrial production is actually growing at a faster trend rate now than before the pandemic, which is impressive. But it is coming on the back of a lot of stimulus, i.e. debt, basically. And external demand has been strong. The consumer side, I think, there are two factors which have contributed to that. One, wage growth has been poor, which doesn't help the feel-good factor. And secondly, there are still numerous concerns about the property sector. And given that Chinese consumers' savings are very much geared to the property sector, that doesn't help confidence either. So addressing that problem, it won't be done with a flick of a finger or a magic button, is basically still the key challenge.
Despite those stimulus efforts, domestic consumption still lagging behind industrial output. Why has it been so challenging to shift towards a consumption-driven economy?
I think the biggest problem lies back in the sort of 2019, 2020, well, 2018, 2019 period, when there was a lot of tightening of regulation. And that dented both consumer and business consumption and confidence. And as much as some of that has been relaxed in the meantime, I think there is a fear that it could be repeated at some point in the future. And that really, without rowing back on some of that regulation, and dare I say it, go large or go home in terms of stimulus policy, getting this transition is not going to be that easy.
Mark, good to see you. Have a good weekend. Mark Oswald, Chief Economist and Global Strategist at ADM ISI.
Mining stocks are up after reports that two of the world's biggest copper producers are in early-stage merger talks. The possible tie-up between Rio Tinto and Glencore would create the world's biggest mining company, with a combined market value of around $158 billion. One source has told Reuters that initial talks have concluded with no agreement reached. A large fire at one of the world's biggest battery plants has forced the evacuation of hundreds of people from their homes. The Moss Landing power plant in Monterey, south of San Francisco, is owned by Texas company Vistra Energy and contains tens of thousands of lithium batteries. Britain's blue chip share index, the FTSE 100, has hit a record high, strengthening 1.6%. Stocks are on a three-day rally after UK inflation dropped unexpectedly this week, with traders anticipating interest rate cuts from the Bank of England.
UK retail sales dropped during December despite hopes that Christmas would provide some relief for retailers. Sales down 0.3% when the analysts had predicted a 0.4% rise. Food sales sank to their lowest in 10 years, but clothing saw a bit of a boost. This meant annual retail sales rose 3.6% on the previous year, half a point below expectations. The Toyota subsidiary Hino Motors has agreed to pay $1.6 billion and pled guilty to deceiving United States regulators about emissions produced by its diesel engines. Hino was charged with fraud for selling more than 100,000 illegal engines in the US between 2010 and 2022. The company will also be banned from exporting diesel engines to the country for 5 years.
The US Supreme Court has ruled against TikTok's challenge to a federal law that requires the Chinese-owned app to be sold or banned in America from the 19th of January. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrace in New York. So, John, this all coming out within the last hour or so. So bring us up to date. What's the latest with TikTok?
Yes, why does this always happen on my watch? Look, guys, this is going to take some time. Put your feet up on the desk, relax, have a coffee. Jamie, if you want to pop downstairs, get a sandwich, that's fine. I've got the show, it's in my hat. All right, so TikTok, TikTok, TikTok. The ban is on its way on Sunday. The TikTok ban is looming. And I don't think it's going to kick in, by the way. That's my main point. But the news of the last hour is that the Supreme Court of the United States, the final arbiter, really, of all laws in America, have ruled at about 10 o'clock this morning local time, just over an hour ago, that they are going to uphold the ban. Okay, so the ban is a law here. TikTok asked them to overturn it, and the Supreme Court justices, all 9 of them, it was unanimous, say, no, we uphold the law. Okay, and you can't really blame them. If we're adults in the room about this, they were told that there's a national security issue, which there may or may not be, I don't know. But they were told that. And if you are a Supreme Court justice, they are always very respectful to the Congress. If the Congress tells them there's a national security issue, then the justices will rely on the word of the Congress. And that's exactly what they've done. So we didn't expect anything different, quite frankly. They signaled they were going to uphold the ban, and they have. However, there are massive caveats to this, because the Biden administration has signaled that they're not going to do anything about it. And they're only in power until Monday afternoon, as you know. And the reason is they're busy clearing out their desks, they're busy writing rude notes to the people who will sit in those desks, and they're busy booking U-Hauls to get their stuff out of the White House. They don't care anymore, it's not their problem. So over to the Trump team. And this is where things take a very, very different turn, because within the last 24 hours, the National Security Advisor for the incoming Trump team has said, we will find a way to stall. And President Trump has just told CNN television here that it's down to me and you're going to see what I'm going to do. So the other thing I think is very important, your top story in the program today, the fact that President Trump and President Xi have had a conversation, and in that conversation, President Trump said afterwards that President Xi and I will do everything possible to make the world more peaceful and safe. And they touched on everything, including, we know, TikTok. So what's going to happen? Well, at the moment, the ban is on its way in. On Sunday, the ban will kick in. Now, the council last Friday, a week ago today, for TikTok, said that the TikTok app will go dark. I don't think it will. I think what's going to happen is that there will be a pop-up that comes up, and it will say, TikTok is now banned in the United States, and if you want to move your data from here over to another site, then here's how you do it. I think that's the first thing. But what I didn't realize until today is in all of this, there is already a 90-day extension automatically built in, providing ByteDance can prove that it is doing everything it can to sell the app. Well, ByteDance says it won't sell the app, but as long as they show that they're doing something about it, then TikTok can stay very much alive. The other thing that Trump can do when he gets into power on Monday is to tell his Justice Department to ignore the ban and say, look, okay, it is the law of the land, but I'm telling you, just ignore it. And therefore, the app will stay on Google and Oracle and on Apple and all those things, so people here can still access it. What Trump can't do, what he cannot do, even if he's the president, is overturn the law on his own. He has to work with Congress. But here's the thing. Chuck Schumer, who is now the de facto leader of the Democrats, now that Biden and Harris are on their way out the door, Chuck Schumer is a very, very powerful leading Democratic senator in the Senate. He's said that he's in favor of giving TikTok more time. So now you have Trump and the leading Democrats saying we want TikTok to continue and certainly have more time to think things out. And the final thing I would say about this, and this one just hits you straight between the eyes when you realize it, Xu Chu, who's the boss of TikTok, who was so badly beaten up by members of Congress when he testified, I mean, really, really bad. They were really, really rude to him, and he's a perfectly nice family man who served in the military in Singapore. He's from Singapore, but they really duffed him up. He is one of the guests of honor at the inauguration in Washington on Monday, and I think that's probably all you need to know. So yes, the Supreme Court has upheld the ban, But behind the scenes, there's a lot going on to make sure it never actually happens. And in the meantime, another clue for this, Meta Platforms and Snapchat, you would think their shares would be through the roof, wouldn't you? Well, they're not. They're completely flat, if not down. And that tells you, I think nobody believes really that this ban is actually going to be enacted in the final analysis. It may take, I don't know what the timeline's going to be, but everything I've told you, I think, is likely to happen.
Well, lots to digest there, John. You also mentioned Apple, which I want to ask you about, because that's a company that's had a very bad day.
Yes. Well, it has, and this is very, very interesting indeed. It really is, because Apple and Tim Cook are completely devoted to China. They really are. Tim Cook was there a couple of weeks ago. I think he's been there about 3 times in 2024. But the question is China loving Apple back? And it doesn't seem so, because they appear to be deserting the brand. Now, what's happened is that China has no longer got Apple as the #1 smartphone maker. It's lost its crown there, in other words. And in fact, it has lost its crown to the extent that it hasn't been this bad for Apple in China since 2016. That's 8-9 years ago, something like that. iPhone sales fell in all 4 quarters last year, 25% lower in the 4th quarter itself, annual shipments down 17%. And part of the reason, I gather, I did not know this, but apparently the iPhones, even the new ones in China, don't have any AI component, and they're not likely to until Beijing clears it. So I think that is part of the problem. But let's have a look, shall we, at the top 3 smartphone pop charts in China. Are you ready? In 3rd place, down from #1 with a decline of 17%, it's Apple. Up 1 place to #2 is Huawei with an increase in sales of 16%. And the #1 is Vivo, a company no one's barely heard of in the West, but it does very well in China. Sales of smartphones up 17%. And they are the new China #1. Now, things could get worse for Apple in 2025 with the tariffs issue, which we don't know about. I would point you in the direction of that President Xi and President Trump phone call, which sounded to me incredibly positive. So we'll see how they get on. Final thing about Apple, they've just pulled their, here, not in China, their AI headline service, because various broadcasters were complaining that the AI was making up headlines and just lying about things, basically. So Apple's just pulled that. They'll put it back on over here when they refine it, when they get it right. So not really a great day for Tim Cook and Apple, it is true. Apple shares, though, Apple shares up 1.2%.
John, thank you very much. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Israel's security cabinet backs the ceasefire, but the bombing continues in Gaza.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
You might think you are better informed in an information age. The fact is, people are more often misled by misinformation. You might think every voice is heard in a digital world. The fact is, many nations and peoples are still underrepresented. And data poverty shuts out many. We at CGTN are committed to transcending the information gap and the digital divide. CGTN, bridging nations and civilizations. CGTN, see the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe.
Israel's government is now meeting to approve the ceasefire deal with Hamas.
It comes after the Security Cabinet recommended approval of the plan, with two far-right ministers voting against it. The deal was agreed by both sides after last-minute differences were resolved. It's due to take effect on Sunday.
Let's talk to our correspondent Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. Jonathan, so is this process now unstoppable?
It pretty much is. Of course, it's the Middle East here and everything is possible, but it seems as if all the obstacles were crossed. First, the understandings between Israel and Hamas, and then the understandings of how the process will be done here in Israel with the Jewish Sabbath already kicking in. How was it done? The ultra-Orthodox ministers, quite a substantial number of them in this cabinet, in this government, are not taking part in the government meeting, which is now taking place. But they all left notes saying that they approve the deal, and that is why there's no question of whether it will be approved or not. The vast majority of ministers will vote for it. True, we know that at least 6 ministers will vote against, 3 from the Jewish Power Party, Itamar Ben-Gvir's party, and 3 from Bezalel Smotrich's party, the religious Zionism, but yet the vast majority of ministers will vote against it. Another obstacle still to cross is that after the agreement is approved by the government, at least by law, there needs to be a 48-hour period in which people can appeal against the agreement. But if that happens, if, say, the agreement is approved later tonight, and then a 48-hour period is given, that would bring us to Sunday night, later than the 12:15 p.m. mark set out by the Qatari mediators. The way to cross that will be that the government will probably give a shorter time for appeals. Israel is really hopeful to have all of the process approved by Saturday night or Sunday morning, no later than that, in order for the implementation of the agreement to begin on Sunday afternoon. The hope is in Israel to see 3 hostages, the first 3 female non-soldier hostages. They are the first ones who are meant to be freed on the first day. Israelis are hopeful to see those 3 hostages back in Israel on Sunday, even as early as Sunday afternoon. It may happen. Everything is indicating that this process is going forward, and probably all of the obstacles have been crossed. But I say again, it's the Middle East, and everything can happen here and derail the process, although it does seem that the wheels are in motion and it will eventually happen.
A ceasefire is just that, though, isn't it? A ceasefire. Will it be durable? Will it last?
Will it last? It may last for a short period. A longer period is a difficult issue. First, let's look at the fact that we're looking at a multi-phase agreement. There is optimism regarding the first stage, which is meant to free 33 Israeli hostages from Gaza and bring a ceasefire for the coming 6 weeks, 42 days. After that, we're speaking of a second stage whose terms are not exactly clear. We do not know exactly what terms are of that second stage. It does call for the release of all of the hostages from Gaza and the withdrawal of the Israeli army from Gaza and the end of the war. Are we certain that this second stage will actually take place? Absolutely not. There is great opposition to it, even from within Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition, and of course everything is very fragile and sensitive and can basically this whole process can be derailed at every instance. So even that stage is not exactly clear. And even if things do progress, and even if, say, the most optimistic case is the one that actually happens with a peace deal or a normalization deal, even between Israel and Saudi Arabia, the core issues between Israel and Gaza, the core issues between Israel and the Palestinian people, they have not been resolved. Without some kind of a solution, then the next conflict may probably be just around the corner. Of course, we're always hoping for the best, but without a real solution to all of the problems, a future conflict could very well happen once again.
Jonathan, thank you for that. Our correspondent Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv.
Well, despite the ceasefire agreement, Israel is continuing to launch attacks in Gaza, with Hamas saying at least 113 people have been killed since the deal was announced.
Our correspondent Rami El-Magari is in Gaza.
You can't say peace, you can't say safety on the ground, you can't say calm on the ground. Every time and then there is an Israeli army strike in certain location in the Gaza Strip. And this is happening actually across the whole Gaza Strip, all over the region, the coastal region. There are reports from time to then about strikes in the territory itself. You can say that the bombardments continue in the northern Jabalia refugee camp and Jabalia town homes, people in the streets, and some buildings are being hit by the Israeli army. The same case goes to the Gaza City, to the central Gaza Strip, to the southern parts of the Gaza Strip where we are in Khan Yunis. There was a sort of a collective strike that killed about 8 people. This is not only the only strike. The strikes are major in other parts of the Gaza Strip, especially in Gaza City. There have been multiple strikes. One of them killed 20 family members inside their homes. And particularly all the strikes happen or occur on homes, on populated homes, in various parts of the Gaza Strip. This kind of Israeli action for the time being, while the people are hoping for a better situation, for peace to come next Sunday or next week, that makes this action makes the people fear of more Israeli escalation that would lead to more deaths and more sadness, more grief across the territory where the people are being happy. So it's a sort of a mix of feeling of the population here that they, in the time they are looking forward to having a changed situation in the upcoming days, they are still bearing the brunt of the Israeli actions. That majority of the victims are civilians, and according to statistics here, more than about 30 people, 30 women and 20 children, or vice versa. But it's sort of 50% of those killed or 40% are women and children. This is a sad situation that has a little bit of joy, a little bit of optimism towards a better situation in the upcoming days.
Efrat Mashikawa is the niece of one of those being held hostage by Hamas, Gadi Moses. I asked for her reaction to the ceasefire deal.
As optimistic as I am, I was very, very hopeful, but we have learned very, very sad lessons over this 1 year and 3 months. And we know that talks are just talks, and we are waiting for real deeds. And as I said, see them here in Israel.
So your uncle is one of the people who is still hostage. What's it been living without him, and with the uncertainty around what's been happening to him?
We really do not know how he is. And this is what's sad. And this is why joy is also mixed with fear and being so scary. The last thing we heard of him was in December 19, 2023. And he has turned 80 in captivity. In March, he will be 81. So he is a very old man. And we have no idea how he is doing.
Some of your other family members were also taken hostage, weren't they, and freed much earlier on. How are they doing now?
It's very different because, you know, they came back in November, and we are so grateful for having them here. There are good days and there are bad days. They're very, very brave, but they feel part of their hearts is still in Gaza with everybody else. It's very hard to describe to people who are so far from the situation. But as you just mentioned, it's very, very different to long for somebody who has not been with us for such a period. So I think that there are so many other strange feelings going on. It's almost hard to describe. They are dealing with it daily, and they're doing their best, but they will be over on only after everybody is back.
So this is obviously something that's still happening now, but I wonder if you're able to think about the future and your hopes for that time, what it might look like.
I would love to share with you. I'm really, really glad this war will, I hope, be over for both sides. I think it was devastating, and I think that we will have to learn lessons. We will have to make sure to secure our border, but at the same time, try to make this region more hopeful and collaborate in a way that each one of us can concentrate on life rather than death, concentrate on growth rather than revenge. And it's very difficult to imagine because the story has not come to an end, but deep, deep inside, I really do keep that sparkle that life shall overcome the darkness.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, thousands of jobs cut at BP, why the oil giant is reducing its global costs.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be, CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories: China's President Xi talks to Donald Trump, with both agreeing to improve communication and contact. Our other headlines: China's economy grows in the fourth quarter, bringing 2024 GDP to its 5% target. And the US Supreme Court refuses an appeal by TikTok, saying the video platform must be sold or banned by Sunday.
Oil giant BP is to cut around 4,700 staff, more than 5% of its total workforce, as part of its plans to reduce costs. Job losses won't affect work in garages and service stations. It's understood that BP has set a cost reduction target of $2 billion by the end of 2026. Let's talk now to Gaurav Sharma, energy analyst from Oilholics Anonymous. Good to see you back on the programme. So, given these high oil prices we've been seeing, why the need for these large-scale job cuts?
Good to be back on the program, Robin. I think the problem is largely of BP's own making. Let's go back to sort of middle part of 2020 when the world started recovering, and so did the oil companies from the ravages of COVID. Now, between 2020 and 2023, according to my research, Chevron's price went up by 50%, ExxonMobil's by 85%, Shell by 26%, BP by a very paltry 7%. Why? Because the CEO at the time, Bernard Looney, decided to reimagine BP. Those are his words, not mine. And what sort of reimagination was that? Instead of sort of focusing on the fragile recovery that the commodities market was seeing, they started going for overpaying for renewables plays. Those problems have now come into the in-tray of his successor, hence the job cuts.
Well, let's talk about that reimagination of BP. As you say, the former CEO wanting to focus more on green projects. Do you think the new CEO will stick with that plan?
I don't think so. I think what he's doing is pretty much what also Shell is also doing, sort of returning, going back to basics, going back to sort of their core offering of oil and natural gas. I don't think he will, but at the same time, he will stick with some of the renewables ventures that they've done. That said, BP last year truncated a lot of its wares. It sold off its U.S. offshore renewables business. It tried to reimagine how he's going to approach retail points, few retail points. All of that is happening, and now this is the next phase, the next draconian phase of almost 8,000 job cuts, 4,700 staff, another 3,000 contractors, nearly 5% of its global workforce.
So it's got this cost reduction target, hasn't it, BP, of $2 billion by the end of 2026. How's it going to achieve that? It must be more than job cuts, surely.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's got to be efficiency savings elsewhere. I think what the markets are watching out for is that I think of 1/4 of that 2 billion figure, it has to be achieved by the end of this year. And I think you will see reductions, cost reductions elsewhere, certain asset sales. But yes, I think job cuts alone won't do the trick.
Gaurav, great to talk to you. Thanks again for coming on the programme. That's Gaurav Sharma, the energy analyst from Oilholics Anonymous.
Now, make sure Apple's products work alongside those of your rival brands. That's the rather blunt message from the European Union as it ends its consultation and investigation. The EU presented findings to the US tech giant back in December and is now working on measures that it expects Apple to enact. Our correspondent Will Denslow reports now from Brussels.
Connecting to various tech devices can often leave consumers feeling frazzled, with some turning to repair shops and tech gurus for assistance.
It would be better if we could connect everything together and if there were no issues. For instance, if you have a Samsung watch, it would be great if you could answer a call on an iPhone.
The European Commission is hoping to address that. Through the Digital Markets Act, the goal is to ensure devices can work together.
The Commission has, let's say, various tools to help enforce the regulation. One of those is opening a non-compliance investigation, and the purpose of this investigation is to really analyze whether the measure that Apple or other gatekeepers put in place are sufficient.
Over recent weeks, the Commission has called on developers to provide technical expertise about how cross-device connection could be achieved.
The Commission will now digest that information as it seeks to present firm conclusions in March. Apple has already raised privacy protection concerns, warning that its systems could become vulnerable to data-hungry companies and rivals.
The Commission says robust frameworks are in place to protect sensitive data. Some analysts say recent changes to iPhone charging compatibility, largely the result of EU laws, is evidence that a resolution can be found.
I think you've already seen with the newer models that they're complying with USB-C and a whole bunch of different things. So I think you have a bunch of guys negotiating this by standing on soapboxes screaming about privacy in the free market. But in the end, they're just working a deal.
Apple is no stranger to EU regulators. Last year, it was ordered to pay nearly $2 billion having been accused of violating EU antitrust rules to keep out rivals. Current relations may be tense, but with Apple's estimated 30% of the European smartphone market, both sides have incentives to be more in sync. William Denslow, CGTN, Brussels.
French President Emmanuel Macron has called for political stability and reforms in Lebanon while meeting the country's newly elected leaders. It's Macron's first visit to Lebanon in 4 years and comes during a 60-day ceasefire agreed between Israel and Hezbollah. The French presidency says the visit aims to help consolidate Lebanon's sovereignty and unity.
Iran's president has arrived in Moscow for talks with President Putin and the signing of a strategic partnership between the two countries. It's the first visit to the Kremlin for Masoud Pezeshkian since he became president in July after his predecessor died in a helicopter crash.
South Korean investigators are applying for a court order to extend the detention of impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol. On Wednesday, Yoon was arrested as part of a criminal insurrection investigation into his short-lived declaration of martial law in December. He has so far refused to answer questions. Investigators want a 20-day detention warrant.
Bird feathers and blood have reportedly been found in both engines of the Jeju Air aircraft that crashed last month in South Korea, killing 179 passengers. One pilot is said to have declared an emergency after reporting a bird strike shortly before the crash. The plane's 2 flight recorders stopped working minutes before the accident, hampering the investigation.
China's population fell for a third year running in 2024, with 1.4 million fewer people than in the previous year. The drop came despite an increase in the number of births. More than 500,000 more babies were born last year compared to 2023, the first increase in 7 years. But the number of deaths outpaced the rise in the birth rate.
The former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan has been sentenced to 14 years in prison in a long-running land corruption case. His wife received a 7-year jail term. The couple were also fined around $10,000.
Khan was removed as Prime Minister in a no-confidence vote in 2022. Our correspondent Daniel Khan reports from Islamabad.
An Islamabad Accountability Court has sentenced former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan to 14 years in prison and his wife Bushra Bibi to 7 years, along with fines. The case involves allegations that Khan's government misused £190 million returned by Britain's National Crime Agency in 2019. His party, the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, has announced plans to appeal the court verdict. Opposition leaders have denounced the ruling, calling it politically motivated and expressing confidence that higher courts would overturn it. The government has defended Khan's conviction, saying it is merit-based and irrefutable. Khan's party information secretary has confirmed the appeal would be filed in the Islamabad High Court. Imran Khan's lawyer has criticized the National Accountability Bureau for lacking evidence of financial misconduct and accused the judges of bias. Meanwhile, the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf says it will launch peaceful protests in the coming days. Daniel Khan, CGTN, Islamabad.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, women's football enters the Big Money League. The scores on the doors. Next.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. The popularity of women's football has soared in recent years, bringing a surge in profits for their clubs. Analysis of the game's top 15 clubs last season showed they brought in more than $120 million, passing the $100 million mark for the first time, a rise of 35% year-on-year. But that is still just a fraction of what the men's teams and their players earn. Let's talk to Jennifer Haskell, who's from Deloitte Football Money League, who carried out the analysis. Good to see you, Jennifer. Welcome to the programme. So we're now seeing that the amount of money generated by women's teams has passed 100 million euros, roughly $100 million for the first time. Are we now seeing women's football taking its place as something that people really want to watch and get behind?
Thanks so much for having me, first of all. And yes, I think we're seeing an incredible growth story on the revenue front, but what we're also seeing are the metrics far and beyond just revenue. So we're seeing increases in attendance, we're seeing increases in engagement and commercial partnerships that are really amplifying the visibility and the audience of women's football. And that's allowing other metrics to continue to rise as well. And we're seeing further investment in both the leagues and the structures, as well as grassroots participation, which we know is important for so many other things beyond just professional sport.
Well, let's talk about some of the specifics. The highest earning team, Barcelona, but 8 of the top 15 high earning teams are English. Why are English teams doing so well?
I think what we're seeing is a lot of investment in terms of the match day culture. We're seeing a lot of test and learn happening across WSL clubs. But what we're also seeing is that in the past season, in the reportable season, all of the WSL clubs actually had an English Premier League equivalent on their men's side. So while we're recognizing that the growth of women's football is happening in a different and unique way, there is also that ability to work with a long-standing brands like an English Premier League club. So I think that's one thing to consider. But also we're seeing now that the leagues are being run by an independent company. You can see further growth in their commercial partnerships and future growth in their broadcast revenue, which will further entrench them in the European landscape.
So is it a case of building audiences and the rest will follow, or is there more that can be done by women's football to generate more money?
I think there's always more that can be done. We think that audience and fan engagement is going to be crucial to the growth of women's sport, because it not only brings further revenue and further eyes and visibility to women's football, but it is bringing new fans, new partners, and new investors into the sport as a whole. So all in all, it's beneficial for the sport to grow, but it's also beneficial in recognizing that we can uplift a lot of these women athletes and give young girls and boys role models for the future.
So great to see women's football making these gains. We should, of course, point out that it's still a very long way behind the kind of money the men's game generates. There's more to be done, isn't there?
Definitely, and I think we're seeing positive growth signs when it comes to the investment, whether that be in infrastructure, whether that be in the fan engagement metrics, but we're also in a fairly nascent stage where, we're looking at women's football as almost a venture capital stage. It's early investment, it's high growth, high potential, and so we're looking forward to seeing it break more barriers in revenue, which is just one metric, but also across attendances, engagement, and visibility in coming years.
Jennifer, thanks so much for coming on the programme. Good to talk to you. That's Jennifer Haskell from Deloitte Football Money League.
Parents sending their children to private schools in the UK now have to pay 20% value-added tax on school fees. The policy, which took effect at the beginning of this year, is aimed at raising revenue for the state education sector. But some critics have argued it could be counterproductive, forcing private schools to close and increasing class sizes in state schools. Our correspondent Lee Jianhua reports.
Show the inspection team how proud we are.
A pep talk for pupils at Malvern St. James Girls' School as the inspection team prepares to visit. But it comes as their parents get used to paying significantly more for their education, with a new 20% value-added tax on fees for independent schools.
It's caused anxiety. I am yet to see parents
actually leaving, although I have a number of parents who have politely asked for rolling notice, depending on how the impact may be borne out by themselves and the school.
For now, the school's investor has absorbed most of the cost. Still, some parents are concerned.
Anna has a dyslexia. I think going forward, I mean, we only have Anna, we have one child, but certainly for people who have more than one child in private education, it will be a massive, massive deal.
Private schools or independent schools are closing, and children, quite a few have gone from her class already and are squeezed into the state school in Malvern.
This is one of the more than 2,500 independent schools in the UK where schools and parents must pay the new tax. The government argues the change will help address educational funding disparities and generate additional revenue. It's estimated in the long term between 35,000 and 37,000 pupils. That's about 6% of the total private school population will switch from private schools to state ones. And the cost of funding these extra pupils in the state sector is expected to peak at about $340 million a year. And in the year of 2029 to 2030, the VAT on private schools is expected to raise about $2 billion. The Independent Schools Council argues the government's estimates are wrong.
We think the numbers moving will in fact be higher, and as a result the money raised from this policy will be negligible or non-existent.
Others suggest the government should boost the state school funding before taxing the independent sector.
But I'd rather they actually focused more attention on improving the opportunities and the outcomes for students who go to state-funded education, which would mean, in the long term, you'd hope, it would mean that people would feel less of a need to use private education.
In 2019, the Labour government voted to abolish private schools, arguing their existence clashed with its aim of boosting social equality. 5 years later, and back in government, Labour has rolled back from that position. But the new tax remains grounded on those same principles. Li Jianhua, CGTN, Worcestershire, England.
It's seen as the holy grail of energy generation. For decades, scientists have been trying to harness nuclear fusion, the same process that powers the sun.
The theory, the potentially huge energy yields and no dangerous radioactive waste, has long been known. But actually achieving it remains elusive. Our correspondent Zhang Yibing reports.
Scientists are attempting to achieve controlled nuclear fusion to provide an ultimate solution to the need for energy.
For achieving the goal of making the artificial sun in the future, the scientists around the world are making the great efforts. In southwestern part of China, there is the giant experimental device. It is called the HL3. For the first time ever, I got a chance to get so close to this fusion experimental device, so I'm going to climb to the top of it.
I talked to the operator of this experimental device.
We should say that it is the largest advanced tokamak device with highest parameters in China. Its ion temperature can reach 150 million degrees Celsius. Since its completion in 2020, its operation parameters have made a series of major progress, and the plasma current has exceeded 1 million amperes.
This big hall is the main control room for this fusion experimental device. Now the personnel here are in position. They're conducting an experiment. On the big screen, we can see the footage on what is going on inside this device right now.
Every day we will do engineering debugging first, because the operation of the whole device requires dozens of and even hundreds of systems to be able to operate efficiently at the same time. In the future, our device will gradually move to the level of core parameter operation, which can lay a very solid foundation for us to participate in the physics experiment of the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor project in the next step.
The artificial sun has gone through decades of research and development. The process may be long, but people like Li Bo believe it will eventually help find an ultimate solution for energy needs. Zheng Yibing, CGTN, Chengdu, Sichuan Province.
And finally, an unmanned SpaceX Starship rocket has broken up in space, forcing flights over the Gulf of Mexico to reroute to avoid the debris.
Mission Control lost contact with the ship minutes after liftoff from Texas. Balls of light could be seen across the sky, leaving trails of smoke. SpaceX owner Elon Musk said it looked like the rocket's breakup was caused by a leak of liquid oxygen.
The headlines again. China's President Xi Jinping talks to Donald Trump, with both agreeing to improve communication and contact. Xi said the two countries should respect each other's core interests and concerns, despite differences.
China's economy grows in the fourth quarter, bringing 2024 GDP to its 5% target.
And time's up for TikTok. The United States Supreme Court says the Chinese-owned video platform must be sold or banned by Sunday.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.